going to specifically look at the cell membrane or the plasma membrane of a cell. Remember that the plasma membrane is a thin, flexible barrier around the cell. So you can see it right around here. It is actually made of lipids, which are going to give the plasma membrane its structure, and proteins, which are going to give it its function. So how it actually works to keep things in and out. So the question is, what does the membrane look like? Well, in 1972, they developed the fluid mosaic model, which basically says that the plasma membrane is a fluid phospholipid bilayer in which proteins and carbohydrate chains are either partially or wholly embedded. That is a mouthful, right? Phosphol what? What are we even talking about? Well, here's how this actually works. So phospholipid bilayer. So bi meaning two. We're going to have two different layers. And phospholipids is the name of a specific type of lipid. So here's a phospholipid. Phospholipids are a particular type of lipid or fat. Phospholipids are made up of two parts. There's a hydrophilic head. Hydrophilic meaning that it is water loving, and that's the phosphol part of it, and a hydrophobic or water hating tail. So when we talk about the cell membrane or the fluid mosaic model, we're talking about two layers of these phospholipids. All right, so basically we would have phospholipid here. Here's one layer of phospholipids, right? Here are the heads and the tails. But there's two layers, so there's a whole another layer here. And again, the tails will be towards the inside and the heads will be on the outside of the cell. So if we were to like keep going, so that you could kind of see how it would turn. I mean, eventually, like it would then, this would make up your entire cell membrane. So two layers of phospholipid with the tails on the inside and the heads facing the inner part of the cell and the outside part of the cell. So again, here's a more precise diagram. You can see the heads, the tails, and the two different layers. The mosaic part of the fluid mosaic model refers to the idea that there are other parts that are found in this lipid bilayer, okay? So there are pieces that are going to be floating around inside of this lipid bilayer. First is going to be these structures called cholesterol. Cholesterol is going to be a membrane lipid, so it's an example of a lipid, a fat, and it's going to sit right in between these tails. So the layer of tails here, these cholesterol molecules sit in here. And what it does is it helps provide some stability to the membrane. Plasma membrane proteins are going to be found all along the outside and the inside of the plasma membrane. So on the outside of the plasma membrane are going to be peripheral proteins. They're found on the very outside, so they would either face the outside environment or they're found sticking out of the inside of the cell, so facing the inside. Integral proteins are those proteins that are like stuck right in the middle. So these ones would be integral proteins. They're in the middle of the bilayer. Membrane proteins do a lot of different things. They are going to be responsible for identifying, we call those proteins marker molecules. They're important in attaching the cell to different environments. They're attachment proteins. They can carry materials around the cell, so those would be transport proteins. Receptor proteins are places or binding sites for chemical reactions. And then there are enzymes that are going to speed up chemical reactions. So that's going to be the functions of all of those membrane proteins, or those proteins that are found within or on or attached to the plasma membrane. There are also carbohydrate chains that are attached to the plasma membranes. These are going to, there's two categories of these. And really, they only occur on the outside surface, and their job is to help protect, recognize, and communicate. So because you have all of these peripheral proteins and you have these carbohydrate chains, This is going to mean that your plasma membrane is asymmetrical, meaning that it's not, all of these things aren't evenly distributed. It's kind of all over. That's where the mosaic part comes, is that you got different things floating all over the plasma membrane. It's not a uniform size. So if we were to draw this out, here's the two different layers. Phospholipids, phospholipids. There's the head of a phospholipid. Here's the tails of the phospholipids. Those proteins that are in between the two lipids, those are called integral proteins, the lipid bilayer. Those proteins that are located either on the inside or the very outside of the lipid bilayer are called peripheral proteins. The cholesterol are examples of lipids that are found inside, in between the tails, that help give it structure and function. And then sometimes there are carbohydrate chains that are attached to the outside. These peripheral proteins and the integral proteins tell the lipid bilayer or give it its function, depending on if it's an attachment protein, whether it's an enzyme. These lipids are going to give the phospholipid bilayer its structure, its strength. If you have any questions, holler. Otherwise, have a great day.